Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Federal Tory leader Pierre Poilievre took to social media, blasting Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on his style of leadership. The Prime Minister was asked his thoughts of a new poll which says close to half of all Canadians are not happy with his recently released federal budget. And we hear from Alberta NDP leadership hopeful Sarah Hoffman, who says she has a plan to help retain doctors here in our province.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre took to social media with a new campaign message blasting Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on his leadership style. Poilievre says the PM wants all of the control in Canada and yet accept none of the responsibility.
He wants to have total control over what you can see and say online, to protect us all from these dangerous forces that might influence our thinking if we're not protected by the angels in the government. And yet, when there is actually a risk of manipulation by hostile and malicious actors like, say, a communist regime in Beijing, he can't even take the responsibility of reading his briefing notes.
First of all, these are briefing notes that I never saw. These are briefings for a briefer who then gave a briefing.
This is the irony, the great irony of his leadership, and one of the reasons why I think he's succeeded in doubling housing costs, giving us the worst inflation in 40 years, sending 2 million people to the food banks, 8,000 people signing up for a Facebook group called the Dumpster Diving Network because they now have to eat out of a garbage can after he drove food prices rising with his carbon tax. He wants to control every aspect of your life, and then when he ruins your life, he wants to take none of the responsibility for the ruin that he caused.
Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was on the road defending his government's federal budget. Now, a recent poll by Leger says close to 50% of Canadians don't like the recently tabled budget. The PM, who was in Oakville, Ontario, was asked on his thoughts on why so many Canadians agree with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre that budget 2024 wasn't very good.
We're a democracy where people get to express themselves and vote however they choose when the federal election comes around. And that's an important piece of it. And I know people are going to vote for all sorts of different parties. I think what Canadians will also do, though, is take a careful look not just at who is reflecting back some of the very real frustrations people are facing, but who's able to solve it. Who's actually putting forward concrete plans to solve the challenges we're facing? Let's just take this announcement we're making today. We're announcing that the federal government is going to get in the business of long-term leases for properties to build on public lands to build affordable housing. That contrasts with Pierre Poilievre's plan for public lands, which is to sell them off to the highest bidder so developers can make money off of them and build homes.
Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says a priority for his party right now is to protect workers' pensions. Speaking with reporters in Edmonton, Singh says the Alberta government needs to keep its hands off of the CPP and not move forward with an Alberta-made pension plan.
For so many Canadians, that is how they are planning their retirement. And the CPP really is what you deserve. It's what you've earned. You've worked your life, you've contributed to this plan, and you deserve to have it there for when you retire. And what this pension means is dignity and respect. It means that when you retire, you can buy the things that you need. You can continue to live in dignity and respect. So when Danielle Smith threatens to attack it, she's attacking the very dignity and the very respect of people who retire.
The Alberta government says it is still studying the potential of pulling out of the CPP and would hold a referendum on the subject to see if Albertans really want an Alberta-made pension plan. The Alberta NDP will be choosing its new leader on June the 22nd. Now, there are 5 candidates vying to replace Rachel Notley. One of them is Edmonton Glenora MLA Sarah Hoffman. She says a big focus of her campaign right now is to bring more doctors to the province. So many Alberta families still don't have a family physician.
I was the health minister when we had a great working relationship with healthcare providers. It was so good, in fact, with doctors that when we sat down to negotiate the last contract under the NDP, and we opened up the books and we were very honest about where we were at as a province, they returned their retention bonus because there wasn't a problem with retention in Alberta. We had more than enough doctors. Every major municipality, you could get a family doctor, and they trusted me to work with them to put that money back into making system improvements. So it needs to start with having a respectful relationship. And I will argue that the fastest way to do that is to bring back the person who is at the table as the health minister in the Premier's chair.
Make sure you catch the full interview with NDP leadership hopeful Sarah Hoffman and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. You know, one of the big names seeking to become the leader of the Alberta NDP is former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says the leadership debate taking place Thursday night here in Lethbridge may reveal if Nenshi may in fact be the front runner.
This will be a time that all the leadership candidates are in the same room. They'll all be answering the same questions. I would imagine you'll see a little bit more discussion, perhaps, of policy, sort of trying to tease out where they might want to take a platform. I do think you will probably see some people trying to push Naheed Nenshi, the former Calgary mayor, who is probably the front runner in this race, on where his political views lie on the spectrum. Of course, Nenshi is sort of famous for being a purple candidate, a post-partisan candidate. He considers himself neither red nor blue, nor conceivably orange.
Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, will also have details on Alberta's water sharing agreement. Catch that interview coming up later in our broadcast. Well, we've been enjoying a nice run of some incredible weather across much of southwestern Alberta lately. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, we may not be hitting any records, but hovering around 20 degrees is still pretty good for this time of year, isn't it?
Well, it is, Hal. Now, it is supposed to drop a little bit lower than that 20-degree mark over the next several days before climbing back up again. We are seeing a high of 18 degrees on Thursday with clear skies in the morning. We're seeing some cloud coverage around noon hour. Also, a west wind at 30, gusting to 50 kilometers per hour tomorrow. This evening as well, we're seeing those west winds gusting to 40K, overnight low of 4 degrees, mainly clear skies, and then we're going to see some cloud coverage as we get closer to that weekend. And I'll be back later in the show to give you that weekend forecast. Hal?
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Alberta government says there are currently 60 wildfires burning here in the province. Most are in the northern districts, including the High Level and Slave Lake Forest regions. Fortunately, 85% of the blazes are under control and 13% are being held. Parks and Forestry Minister Todd Loewen says more firefighters are being added to help battle the blazes.
Our personnel have been working tirelessly to protect our communities and forests, with 200 wildfires already fully extinguished just this year. While this elevated number of new wildfire starts in 2024 points to concerning levels of wildfire danger, it also means our response tactics are working. We will be introducing fire bans today. Alberta Wildfire's response is only one part of the equation. As I've mentioned many times before, wildfire prevention and preparedness is a shared responsibility. Everyone must do their part to safeguard their properties and communities by fostering wildfire resilience. One of the ways this can be done is becoming familiar with fire-smart principles. For Albertans who live in or near the forest, I urge you to assess your property for wildfire danger and take any preventive action you can to address these risks. This includes breaking up fuel sources that could ignite a structure, removing trees in close proximity to your home, and properly maintaining your gutters and roofs to rid the materials that could easily ignite, such as leaves and dry needles.
The province announced that it is building more homes to help address the housing crisis here in Alberta. Officials say 3,122 new housing starts were recorded last month, 31% of which were rental homes. CMHC says in the first few months of 2024, there were over 9,700 housing starts here in our province. That's an increase of 3,500 from 2023. The province says over the past 3 years, construction has begun on more than 25,000 rental homes. Lethbridge City Council voted unanimously to approve the Water Conservation Plan and Strategy. That includes targets and an updated water rationing action plan. City officials say with the recent drought conditions, they are examining the possibility of water rationing, which may take place to ensure that more people will have access to clean drinking water. That may include limiting the uses of water, such as irrigating lawns or filling up swimming pools, limiting the volume of water or time when it can be used, and temporarily suspending water supply. Officials say during the summer months, the use of treated water in Lethbridge increases by more than 200%. That's mainly due to irrigation of lawns and landscaping. Recent data shows that job scams are on the rise here in Canada, and those on the lookout for a new career can end up falling victim to fraud and theft. BCN's Naveen Day has that story.
According to the Canadian Business Association, scammers continue to take advantage of people anxious about finding a new job by perpetuating scams with phony employment offers. Odetta Girofte with the Better Business Bureau serving southern Alberta and East Kootenay says scammers often make job postings that appear to be legitimate, but are not.
The sole purpose of this fake job postings are just to attract possible candidates, to have them apply for a job, which turns out to be fake. And through the application, they'll provide a lot of personal and confidential information, such as their legal name, their social insurance number, their banking information, credit card information. So a lot of information, and that's what makes this type of scam really risky.
While it may be difficult to decipher a legitimate job posting from a fake one, Girofte advises of the many red flags to identify in a potential employment scam.
If anyone reaches out to you unexpectedly, out of the blue, via text message or email, and offers you a job opportunity that just sounds too good to be true, that's a huge red flag. Any offer that includes high pay salary, flexibility to work from home, flexible hours, all those are huge red flags to watch out for.
She adds the biggest red flag to identify a scam is where there is a lack of or complete absence of face-to-face communication.
If all communication is done via text message or email, and you don't get a chance to meet with anyone in the company face to face, or at least have a meeting via a computer screen, that's a huge red flag that you're probably dealing with a company that's not real.
And job scams have been on the rise. According to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, in 2022, job scams cost Canadians $7.2 million in losses. But in 2023, job scam losses more than tripled, amounting to more than $26 million. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Wow. Doctors in the United States have transplanted a pig kidney into a patient from New Jersey who was near death. Officials say it was part of a dramatic pair of surgeries that also included a fix for her failing heart. We have more on this report from Shelby Lum.
A few weeks ago, Lisa Pisano was near death, in desperate need of a heart and kidney transplant. But because of how sick she was not a candidate for traditional transplant. So her doctors came to her with a novel approach: a mechanical pump for her heart, paired with a new kidney from a genetically modified pig.
I said yes because I didn't have any other options. I really didn't. I was at the end of my rope. So I just took a chance, and worst case scenario, if it didn't work for me, it might have worked for someone else, and it could have helped the next person or the next person.
When we were able to, offer another option other than just palliative care, she was excited. She knew that this was experimental, that we couldn't in any way guarantee that it was going to be successful, but she wanted to try it. It's like being in a maze and you can't find a way out. And we found a way through that maze, which was to use an organ that we could immediately get from a pig to get her off dialysis and then make her a candidate for a heart pump in a timely fashion where she could survive it.
This experiment is the latest in a string of attempts to make animal-to-human organ transplants a reality. Pisano is the second person to receive a pig kidney, following a Boston area man's transplant in March, who's at home and doing well 5 weeks post-transplant.
I felt desolate before. I just didn't know the ups, the downs. I didn't know, where I was going, where I was headed. So this gave me an opportunity at a second chance. So, and I took it.
It's been transformative. I mean, she's a different person. She was so ill that when she came in, She had a couple of cardiac arrests. You know, that's how close to death she was.
If you feel good, you can kind of start shifting your hips side to side and seeing if you can, doing a little dance.
10 days after her kidney transplant, Pisano stood with a group of physical therapists and took her first steps.
Good. Nice. Good. And back, just because where the lines are. Keep coming, keep coming, keep coming.
I want to spend time with my grandkids, do stuff with them.
The Israel Defense Forces released video that they say showed strikes on Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. The Israeli Defense Minister says the recent strikes have eliminated half of Hezbollah's commanders.
יש פעולה התקפית הולכת ומתמשכת של כוחות צה"ל בכל דרום לבנון וגם במקומות אחרים בלבנון. התוצאות המבצעיות הן מרשימות מאוד. מחצית ממפקדי חיזבאללה בדרום לבנון חוסל. אלה האנשים שהיו אחראים על הפעולה ההתקפית, על הרצון לפגוע באזרחי מדינת ישראל. אנחנו גרמנו לכך שאו שהם מתים או שהם מתחבאים ומפקירים את דרום לבנון לפעולתו של צה"ל שנעשית באופן אינטנסיבי.
U.S. President Joe Biden announced a new $95 billion war aid measure that includes financial assistance for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and other allies.
It's going to make America safer, it's going to make the world safer, and it continues America's leadership in the world, and everyone knows it. It gives vital support to America's partners, and so they can defend themselves against threats to their sovereignty and to the lives and freedom of their citizens. And it's an investment in our own security. Because when our allies are stronger, and I want to make this point again and again, when our allies are stronger, we are stronger. It's a path to my desk. It was a difficult path. It should have been easier and it should have gotten there sooner. But in the end, we did what America always does. We rose to the moment. We came together and we got it done.
Residents in Nairobi were still grappling with the aftermath of massive flooding, which has inundated their homes and causing extensive property damage. Relentless rainfall hit a number of regions in Kenya, causing the recent flooding.
This is a disaster that has happened from 11 at night until now. We are still rescuing people in this village called Ngondo. And we hope that the government will take precautions to help our people. Our people are suffering. And if you tell them to take their things and go, where are they going?
Incredible devastation. Wow. You know, as the NHL playoffs continue here in North America, there was a big surprise during the IIHF Under-18 Asian and Oceanic Championship, which began on Tuesday. Kuwait made its debut in the hockey tournament, and it didn't end well. The Kuwaiti team lost to Team Thailand 57-0. Thailand outshot Kuwait 122-1. Thai forward Nadapat Patong led the way in scoring with 13 points, including 7 goals. Now, ironically, Thailand holds the current record for the worst loss in the tournament, losing 92-0 to South Korea back in 1998. That worked out to more than 1.5 goals per minute. 92-0. You know, the goalie probably had a sunburn on the back of his neck from the red light going off so much. Well, it was another beautiful spring day here in Lethbridge. Not quite warm enough for a sunburn, but maybe a little bit of a tan. And the warmer temperatures should remain with us the rest of the week. A full look at the weather pictures coming up. We've been enjoying some spectacular days across much of southwestern Alberta. Great days for going for a bike ride or maybe pulling out your longboard, not your skateboard, but your longboard, if that's your thing. The mercury, however, may be dipping just a little bit. Jeanette Roger is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the 20-degree days may be leaving us fairly soon?
Yeah, it looks like it is about to dip a little bit in temperature over the next few days, but still staying within that seasonal range, seasonal high being 15 degrees. So we're still definitely in that range. Even tomorrow, a little bit higher as we get from 21 down to 18 tomorrow, clear skies. Then we're going to see some cloud coverage, high of 12 on Friday, up to 16 on Saturday, still remaining a bit cloudy. Mix of sun and cloud for us on Sunday with a high of 17, climbing up to 18 on Monday and then back to 17 on Tuesday to round out that 7-day forecast. So still in that seasonal, sometimes even higher than that average high of 15 degrees. for this time of year. Average low is 1 degree. Our record high on this day was 27 degrees. That happened back in 1977, and the record low on this day was -10. That was in 1959. Sun rose this morning at 6:20, looking at a sunset this evening at 8:40 p.m. So we're seeing 14 hours and 20 minutes of daylight. That's what that means, and it's actually 4 minutes longer than we saw yesterday. A bit of a rainy one on the west coast tomorrow. Both Victoria and Vancouver experiencing wet conditions. High of 10 in Victoria, 11 for a high in Vancouver, 16 the expected high tomorrow in both Edmonton and Calgary. Mainly clear skies across Alberta. Calgary could see up to 40 winds tomorrow. And then as we get into the rest of the prairies here, Saskatoon looking at a lovely 21 degrees with clear skies. Same thing for Regina. Regina seeing 40 winds as well, and up to 60-kilometer-per-hour winds in Winnipeg tomorrow with a high of 22 degrees and mainly sunny skies. Now, as we get into the central part of the country, Toronto seeing clear skies, but only 9 degrees. High of 10 in Ottawa. Montreal sitting at 9. Both Montreal and Ottawa, I want to mention, still looking at those wind chill values of -8 in the morning. And then same thing for Fredericton. Fredericton even colder with the wind chill, -17 in the morning, but climbing to a high of 8 degrees during the day. Clear skies there, high of 6 in Halifax, clear skies there as well. Now, Charlottetown could see some flurries in the morning before clearing up later on in the day, high of only 4 degrees there, 11 for a high in St. John's, and we're looking at early morning showers and then some scattered clouds throughout the day. So there you have it. There is your forecast.
Equifax says including alternative data, including rental payments and credit scores, could help boost the scores of about 5 million Canadians. The agency says it's exploring how rent data could factor into credit scores. The latest federal budget calls on banks and credit bureaus to prioritize launching tools that would allow renters to opt in to report their rent payment history. The government says this could help more renters become homeowners, as on-time rental payment history could strengthen credit scores and make it easier to qualify for a mortgage or a lower interest rate. It appears as though tourism in Canada has come roaring back from pandemic lows. Operators, however, say the sector has yet to reach pre-COVID levels, and debt remains a hefty burden for thousands of Canadian small business owners. Tourism Industry Association of Canada CEO Beth Potter says the sector brought in $109 billion in revenue last year. That is slightly more than in 2019, but a lot less in real terms after accounting for inflation. She says international visitor numbers were down from 5 years ago as well. Government officials say everything from rampant wildfires to the warmest winter on record have hurt operators. Canadian National Railway Company says earnings slid nearly 10% last quarter compared to the same period a year ago to $1.1 billion. The Montreal-based company says the result came amid higher labor costs and lower revenue from container shipments. The country's largest railroad operator, however, says its growth opportunities are taking shape as the economy starts to ramp back up. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 138 points on the day to finish at 22,011. The Dow was down 42 points to 38,503. The S&P 500 was up 1 point on the day to 5,071, and the Nasdaq was up 16 points to 15,712. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 54 cents to $82.82 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 17 cents to $1.65 US. Gold was down $5.86 on the day to $23.1617 US an ounce, and silver was down 14 cents to $27.16 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley's at $6.40, canola's at $13.36, and corn is at $7.93 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.25 to $182.10. Feeder cattle were up 65 cents to $243.10, and lean hogs were down $1.23 to $97.35. That's for the May contract. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to $72.97 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the province announced that it is building more homes to help address the housing shortage here in Alberta. Officials say 3,122 new housing starts were recorded last month, 31% of which were rental homes. CMHC says in the first few months of 2024, there were over 9,700 housing starts here in Alberta. That's an increase of 3,500 from 2023. Party members with the Alberta NDP will be choosing their new leader on June the 22nd. Now, coming up next, we shall hear from one of the leadership hopefuls, Edmonton MLA Sarah Hoffman. Watch the in-depth interview with MLA Hoffman and BCN's Jeanette Rocher momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews.
Alberta is seeing an early start to a forest fire season, not to mention a risk of drought this summer. Also, the NDP leadership candidates are preparing to debate beginning this week in Lethbridge. And the Premier defending her choice of the doctor to chair a panel investigating the use of data during the pandemic. A lot going on in the province this week, and here to chat about it all is Tyler Dawson, who is the Alberta legislative correspondent for the National Post. Tyler, great to have you on again. Welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Tyler, as mentioned, there has been an early start to forest fire season, which was officially declared back in February. And now we've seen the first instances of Albertans being put on evacuation alerts because fires are threatening their communities. And we've seen a couple of those evacuation alerts have already been lifted in northern communities, but a third for the MD of Peace in Grimshaw remains in place. So Tyler, what does this tell us about the forthcoming fire season in Alberta?
Well, I think we knew that this was possibly going to be quite a bad fire season. As you mentioned, back in February, the government declared an early start to forest fire season. Usually that comes on March 1st. It came, I think, February 20th is when that was officially declared. So there's been sort of this preparation going on in the intervening months, getting ready for this fire season. And this week we have sort of seen, the actual start of it. Obviously, there have been fires that burned over the winter. There have been fires here and there around the province, but these, I think, are probably the first ones of 2024 that sort of prompted some people to leave their homes, other people to be on standby to leave their homes. And they're basically, one of them was up near Fort McMurray, one was on a First Nation near Cold Lake, and the third, as you mentioned, is in the Grimshaw sort of area in northwestern Alberta. And so two of those, the one near Fort McMurray and the one near Cold Lake, I believe have been lifted. The one that is in the MD of Peace is sending people to Grimshaw. Actually, that one is still in place. So just goes to show we've got a bit of an early start on this. People are obviously on edge, and it's a good time, I think, to remind people to think about what they might need to do in terms of evacuation, whether that's getting pets ready to go, whether that's having water and food and things like that on standby. It's been very dry up here in Edmonton. I think it's been the same down in Lethbridge. It's going to be, in all probability, a fairly dry few months, and so people are going to need to be prepared, and the government has done its preparations. Of course, we won't know exactly what it is going to look like until the fires really get going and the government begins to respond, but bit of a scary end of April, perhaps, for some of the folks around the province.
Yeah, it is, and it was a really scary season last summer, so I would hate to see that happen again, but it looks like we're going to be bracing for that again, unfortunately. Now, Tyler, the Alberta government is spending $57 million to research the viability of hydrogen for home heating and vehicle fuel. And several specific grants will boost funding for hydrogen-based infrastructure and fueling. And I guess as the province made its announcement, an American company called Air Products announced it would build hydrogen fuel stations along the QE2 highway. So, Tyler, what is the government spending? Why rather are they spending money on hydrogen?
Well, the government is pretty bullish on hydrogen. The idea is that this is a cleaner fuel than natural gas or oil, certainly cleaner than coal, and that this is, sort of the fuel of the future. And not only do they see that as a way to sort of meet some of their carbon reduction targets in the province and nationally, but also they see that as a potentially viable and profitable export product to places like Asia. So, it's been talked about for a long time, and there's been a lot of enthusiasm about it, and we're starting to see some of the money, get put down for these things. So, as one example, some of that money is going towards a rec facility in Sherwood Park, a hamlet just outside of Edmonton, that's going to be used to sort of heat and power that facility. It's, I think, a bit of a long road before we have hydrogen-fueled vehicles. Of course, you'll need the infrastructure for hydrogen fuel stations, but you'll also need vehicles that are ready to take hydrogen fuel and not your regular gasoline. So I think there's still a fair number of logistics to be sorted out here, but the government very much sees this as sort of the fuel of the future, and there's actually been some cooperation between the provincial government and the federal government on this file. So, it's not as contentious perhaps as some of the other policies that are going back and forth between the two governments. So, good chunk of money, certainly some research, some individual grant funding to try and get some of these, sort of new fancy projects or what have you off the ground. And of course, as you mentioned, a little bit of private investment here as well, which perhaps suggests that this is not just, the government trying to finance a sector of the economy or make something happen, and there is actually some private interest in this. So I think it remains to be seen how extensive this is, how successful this is, but hydrogen, I think, is going to be one of those things we hear quite a bit about from the government over the next, months, years, decade, perhaps.
Yeah, so you think hydrogen fuel over and above even these electric vehicles?
Well, I think they're part of the same sort of priority, which is reducing emissions from vehicles. But I don't think you're going to see I don't think you're going to see hydrogen supplant electric, if for no other reason than you currently have electric vehicles on the market. And if there are any hydrogen vehicles, I couldn't name any of them. So I think that's probably a factor.
Exactly. Okay, moving on here. Premier Danielle Smith is defending her choice of the doctor to chair a panel investigating the use of data during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's this Dr. Gary Davidson, who is the former chief of emergency medical at the Red Deer Regional Hospital. And he has argued that the province exaggerated hospital data to justify its pandemic response, but Smith is standing by him. So what did she say, Tyler?
Well, she basically said that she wants to hear from a variety of opinions and a variety of people, and, not just the people who were sort of the mainstream scientific consensus on this stuff. And, that's, of course, been a bit of a theme with Danielle Smith since she entered the leadership race. She very much was sort of catapulted into the premier's office on this discontent over the way the government handled the pandemic. And I should note, discontent over the way the government handled the pandemic that came from conservatives, because, of course, there were plenty of left-wing or progressive people who did not like the way the Jason Kenney government handled the pandemic, but they, disliked it for very different reasons than some of the United Conservatives party support. So this has been a bit of a theme. This is not particularly new. What is controversial about this, of course, is that you have an official government report that is, being produced by someone who appears to have heterodox opinions on the way that the pandemic was managed. And so that's just raised some controversy with people wondering, whether or not this person's analysis of the data, ought to be given sort of the government stamp and things like that. So, but the premier said, look, I want to hear from a bunch of different people. I want controversial opinions. I don't just want the opinions of mainstream thinkers and researchers in science. So, small controversy perhaps, but it does, I think, suggest that when that report comes out, it was supposed to be done last December, I think, but has taken a bit of time to get finished. When that does come out, I think it's going to get quite a bit of scrutiny, perhaps more than it otherwise would have, just because of the personalities involved.
I think you're right about that for sure. Okay, the deadline to buy memberships to vote in the Alberta NDP leadership race was on Monday, and the first of 3 debates takes place this Thursday evening in Lethbridge. I know we're getting all geared up for it here, and the NDP is calling this period the persuasion period before votes are actually cast. And the new leader will be selected on June 22nd, of course. So Tyler, what is the current state of the race?
Well, so the way it kind of works is before the membership deadline, what leadership candidates do is they're trying to get out there and sign up as many members as they can. They want to not just fight over the existing pot of members, they want to bring in hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands perhaps of new members who they can more or less count on to support them. And so that part of this is done. Everybody's in. If you didn't buy your membership by Monday, you're out of luck. You can vote in the next election for whoever leads the NDP if you want, but you're not going to get to pick them as a member of the party. So at this point, as you mentioned, the persuasion period, this is about fighting over the big pot of people, not just the people you've signed up, but everybody who's joined the party over the last 10, 20, 15, 30, 40, whatever years. So the debate is a great example of that. This will be a time that all the leadership candidates are in the same room. They'll all be answering the same questions. I would imagine you'll see a little bit more discussion, perhaps, of policy, sort of trying to tease out where they might want to take a platform. I do think you will probably see some people trying to push Naheed Nenshi, the former Calgary mayor, who is probably the front runner in this race, on where his political views lie on the spectrum. Of course, Nenshi is sort of famous for being a purple candidate, a post-partisan candidate. He considers himself neither red nor blue, nor conceivably orange. And of course, the NDP has at times been a very left-wing party. Rachel Notley, I think it's fair to say, brought that party a bit more towards the center. Certainly, there are candidates running right now. Gil McGowan, the president of the Alberta Federation of Labour, for example, is a fairly old-fashioned workers-style New Democrat. So I think those are some of the issues we're going to start to see teased out, starting with this debate on Thursday. And it's very much going to be the period of time when the candidates are trying to distinguish themselves from the pack, appeal to the members that are out there, because, of course, you don't want to win and then find out that some huge portion of the party really hates you. That's a whole other problem that they could deal with. So I expect we're going to find out, more and more about these candidates. And I think now that we're in this period, from a media perspective, probably people are going to pay a little bit more attention to the race, which I think is, probably a good thing. We think about how much attention was paid to the race to replace Jason Kenney 2 years ago. So it'll be an interesting new phase. And as you mentioned, June 22nd, we will find out who replaces Rachel Notley.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so we mentioned wildfires earlier, but we're also being told that Alberta is facing a real risk of drought this summer. So while we don't know the full extent quite yet because snow melt and water is still entering the system, the government did take several steps to ensure that there will be enough water for human, agricultural, and livestock needs. And I know that a major water sharing agreement, mostly in the south of the province, was announced last week. And it will see multiple municipalities reduce their water use, including here in Lethbridge, and industrial operations and irrigation districts have also agreed to use less water. So this will have an impact on Albertans, won't it, Tyler? But what might those impacts actually look like?
Yeah, it certainly will. At this point, we can already see some of those impacts. A great example of that, maybe a funny example of that, is that in Calgary, the city is not washing its municipal vehicles as often to try and conserve water. So, your local bus or truck taking municipal workers out somewhere might be looking a little bit shabby, and that's because they're trying to save water. So it would not surprise me at all if we saw further restrictions coming in municipalities, whether that's a prohibition on watering your lawn or watering your garden. There's certainly going to be guidance for people to try and limit their showers, limit the amount of dishwasher use, limit the amount of washing machine use. All those sort of water intensive processes that go on in the household. There will certainly be guidance to try and limit it. There may be bylaws preventing it in the months ahead. But of course, you alluded to this water sharing agreement, which is the much bigger issue, which is that we have all this water in the province and it's divvied up by various businesses and municipalities and so on and so forth. And so what this water sharing agreement does basically is it's looking at, I think, 3 or 4 river basins, as you mentioned, primarily in the south of the province. And they've sort of voluntarily said that, if we end up in a drought situation, we're not going to take our full portion of it. We're going to, make sure that there's enough for everybody to get water. And a good example of that is one of the irrigation districts down towards Lethbridge. I think it's St. Mary's, but I could be wrong about that. Your farmers are going to get 8 inches of water per acre, I think. Anyway, it's less water than they would like. I can tell you that. It's less water than they would like. It's enough probably to grow a crop. It's not enough to grow, the world's finest crop. So that's an example of, sort of reductions in some of the water that's going to be available to not cause too much economic damage, to avert catastrophe, but to also make sure that there's enough water for all of the other uses in the province. And this actually isn't limited just to southern Alberta, although that's generally the driest part of the province. But northwestern Alberta is quite dry as well. There are some implications for Saskatchewan because of this, because, of course, our rivers go on to Saskatchewan, although there's actually been quite a bit more rain and snow in some parts of Saskatchewan. But the point is, the water issue is an issue. There is, at this point, seems like a shortage. We are not in an emergency state of drought yet, although that certainly could change. As you mentioned, watching the snow melt enter the system is going to be important. So lots happening on the waterfront, probably something that a lot of people in Alberta don't think about very often, but certainly down your way, I imagine a lot more people do because of the agriculture that happens.
Almost out of time here, but maybe time for one more question. Alberta's United Conservative Party is always seemingly liking to fight with Ottawa. The latest battle is the new legislation, of course, that if passed will give the province oversight on deals inked with the feds. Mostly this was expected to affect municipal governments who may be trying to sign energy or transit or housing deals with the federal government. So they're concerned about increased tape, Tyler, but what else are they concerned about?
Well, there's been a concern raised by universities and colleges, actually. A lot of the funding for that stuff comes from the federal government. You know, there's an application and an approvals process. Money goes to the university. And so there does seem to be talk afoot that the provincial government is going to start wiggling its fingers around in this pot. It's unclear exactly what they would do. Would they set up their own funding stream to approve research? Would they just catalog it and complain about research they don't like? The gist of it is that they say, you know, there isn't an ideological balance in university research, and they're not happy about that. So we don't know what it's going to look like. We do know that professors and researchers are not super happy about the possibility of political interference in their research.
Right, exactly. Well, it looks like we are out of time here, but Tyler, thanks so much for joining me today. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Always happy to come on.
Great. Tyler Dawson is the Alberta legislative correspondent for the National Post. 5 candidates are vying to replace Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley. One of them is joining me today. Sarah Hoffman formerly held the positions of Health Minister and Deputy Premier during Rachel Notley's time as Premier. She's here now, and we welcome her to Bridge City News. Sarah, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jeanette.
Absolutely. Okay, so first of all, can you maybe tell our viewers why you believe that you're the best candidate for the job and what it is that makes you so different from the other candidates?
Yeah, you know, my whole life, people have said that women like me don't belong in politics. I'm sassy, I have a bigger body, and I have a really hard time pretending to be somebody that I'm not. But I think just like they've said we don't deserve to win in Southern Alberta, we've proved them wrong, that there are lots of people who share our values right across this province. And I'm looking forward to proving them wrong in this leadership race too. I think it's important that we own our values and own who we are. And I think people like that and respond really well to it. So I've definitely got a track record of working hard and winning, and that's my plan for this leadership race as well.
Okay, and what are you hearing specifically from people in Lethbridge and Southern Alberta? Why, what are they most concerned with, Sarah?
Definitely, I've been going to Lethbridge for decades. We held a provincial council or convention there years ago. I remember it was the middle of winter and the roads were really awful. And at that time, it was a lot of the same things that people are talking to me about now. Healthcare is top of mind, especially in Lethbridge, where about half the people there don't have access to a family doctor right now. Expanding the other types of care is great, but there's no replacement for that relationship with a primary care doctor. A lot of women are having to drive down the highway to have babies. That's not okay either. So it is definitely one of the biggest issues that's raised with me. And then another big one, of course, being a university town, is the lack of support for post-secondaries. And now with Danielle Smith bringing in this bill, it's Bill 18, around wanting to stop there being outside investment from Alberta into things that she might not support, including federal funding. A lot of our university dollars come from the federal government, and we should be working to make it even stronger partnership and to bring more money in instead of chasing it away. So those are some of the top issues, along with climate change is another huge one. And not everyone says climate, but people are talking about drought and wildfires, and especially in Southern Alberta, the scarcity of water. And with the current government talking about mining on the eastern slopes, that's going to impact the headwaters and the watershed that serve all of us in this province.
Mm-hmm. And now you mentioned this right off the hop there, healthcare, and you say that Alberta needs more hospitals, obviously. So how would you go about doing that, and where would the money come from for that?
Yeah, so when I was the Minister of Health, we committed to the Calgary Cancer Centre. The UCP didn't pull the plug on that. We also committed to a new hospital in South Edmonton. The UCP has pulled the plug on that, and to expanding Red Deer as sort of the first 3 projects, and they've definitely stalled out on Red Deer. We haven't seen the kind of progress that I expected in the last 5 years. We also know that we need to expand cardiac care in Lethbridge and other acute care services. And the great news is that there's a lot of potential to be able to expand that care. So one of the things that I want to do is grow the programs from the U of A and the U of C into U of C Med School into Lethbridge. And I will give a little bit of credit to the UCP here. They have started that work, but we need to scale it up and we need to do it quickly. When people have their practice and their residency in a community that's a positive experience, they're likely to stay there. So let's make sure we give them more opportunities to learn in Lethbridge and then be able to be those healthcare leaders that we so desperately need in Lethbridge. And where does the money come from? We all know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So this is a reasonable investment to make sure we need 1,000 more family doctors, 1,000 more doctors in Alberta, and about 3,000 nurse practitioners or physician assistants to support them to make sure that they are seeing the people who need their attention and that others who have other skills can see them in that team-based environment. And we will save significantly on emergency room visits, ICU visits. When people can actually get the care in a proactive way, it's better for their personal health care and it's also better for the expenses of the overall system. So let's keep people connected with doctors and seeing and doing preventative care instead of having to deal with more urgent cases down the road.
Now, if Alberta does get more hospitals, Sarah, and you mentioned it right there, it stands to reason that we obviously need more physicians, more nurses. So what should be done to attract and retain these health professionals?
Number one, it starts with respect. And this is another thing that sets me aside from the other candidates. I've been the health minister, and I was the health minister when we had a great working relationship with healthcare providers. It was so good, in fact, with doctors that when we sat down to negotiate the last contract under the NDP, and we opened up the books and we were very honest about where we were at as a province, they returned their retention bonus because there wasn't a problem with retention in Alberta. We had more than enough doctors. Every major municipality, you could get a family doctor, and they trusted me to work with them to put that money back into making system improvements. So it needs to start with having a respectful relationship. And I will argue that the fastest way to do that is to bring back the person who is at the table as the health minister in the premier's chair. That, I think, would send a very strong message to healthcare providers about the kind of seriousness that Albertans take the healthcare that we all receive. And then, in terms of recruitment, BC very successfully recruited 500 doctors in the first year of having an NDP government. And part of it is that they changed some of the funding models so that people who wanted to be on a salary instead of running doctors' offices like small businesses where turnover is how you get paid. We brought in more salaried options there in British Columbia, and a lot of doctors were very keen to work in that environment where you can have deeper relationships, work with patients who have more complex needs, and not feel like you're costing yourself money by providing that longer appointment or taking more issues. So often you'll walk into an office and see only 1 or 2 issues per visit on the wall. That's because doctors are paid per visit, and that's not really fair to them. We need to make sure that the patients have the opportunity to have better care. So it can be good for doctors and it can be good for patients at the same time. And then another piece is that we have a lot of folks living in Alberta or living abroad who've been trained in other jurisdictions. And we need to bring more postgraduate opportunities here for them to use their expertise in the healthcare system, do some additional training to make sure that they meet the requirements of the various health colleges. But there are people who already live here, as well as many people who are studying internationally who would like to come back to Alberta. So let's find more opportunities for them to work in the healthcare system, show them respect, and make sure that all of us can have access to great healthcare.
Yeah, it's a big one, that's for sure, Sarah. Now, some are calling for the NDP to move more toward the political center. This is just switching gears a little bit from healthcare. So with that in mind, any thoughts on outsider but political heavyweight Naheed Nenshi being part of this race? Do you have any concerns about a change of direction for the party?
Nahed and I always have fun when we're in the same room. There's always some good laughs and interesting banter, but I want to win. I think that it's important that we have somebody who's been at the table, who's got the experience, and who can get us back on track very quickly. And I will also say that I've door knocked hundreds of thousands of doors, including doors in Lethbridge. I've been there for fundraisers. I've been there for nomination meetings for our local candidates. And what I keep hearing is that we need more bold policies. We don't need to be more cautious. We need to be more courageous. And that's what I'm offering through this leadership campaign. And I'm excited that we have lots of attention on it. And I look forward to earning the votes of every single party member I can. Now's our chance to connect with all of these existing members and new members and talk to them about what kind of vision I'm offering them. So I'm excited to do that through the debates, through one-on-one conversations and various meetings throughout the province.
Okay, awesome. Do you have any concerns, though, about a change of direction for the party?
Well, I plan on winning, so I'm excited
So
for the direction I'm bringing to the party, and a real focus on health, climate, and housing. And I think when I talk to people who live in this province, they know that we need NDP values to solve those three biggest crises. We can't say that the free market's going to solve housing. In fact, the free market has driven up housing costs higher here per year. The growth has been higher in Alberta, specifically in Edmonton and Calgary, than any other large city in the country. That's not okay. That's not sustainable. We need to lean into who we are as New Democrats to be able to solve those problems. So these are the kinds of solutions I'll be proposing throughout this leadership race. And I hope to earn the support of the membership and have a strong mandate to be the NDP.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and of course, besides healthcare, we all know that the housing crisis continues across Canada. And I understand that one of your proposals is to cap rent increases. So can you maybe explain how this would be implemented and how it would benefit Albertans?
Right now, the market is out of control. There's no balance in terms of supply and demand. And with so many large corporate landlords, they really do have the ability to determine how much their increases are every year because they control so much of the stock. I think it's important that we build more co-op, affordable, and social housing and make sure that while we're doing that, we put a cap on how much rents can go up. So I'm proposing what we had in a bill that the UCP just voted down yesterday, actually, was 2% for the first 2 years and then cap to inflation for the next 2 years. So it's a short-term rent cap increase, but at the same time we have that in place, we need to build units all over the province. And we've done this before. Peter Lougheed brought in temporary rent caps, and he also invested in social and affordable housing. And we can use those same proven strategies that we had in the past. And then in the early 1980s, the late 70s, we were leaders in the country in terms of building housing and doing it all across the province. So it's something that we've done before. We can learn from our past, but absolutely, people right now are writing to me every day about rent increases. Some of them are as high as 30%, and that is not sustainable. And definitely their wages aren't going up 30%. So we need to take urgent action to keep people housed.
Yeah, it seems like a landlord's market these days, that's for sure. So what would you say then to landlords who might argue that a rent cap unfairly targets them and reduces their opportunity for profit and to stay ahead of the inflation rate?
This is why it's for 4 years. I want to make sure that we have 2 years at 2% and then the next 2 years at inflation. And the reason is because the market's broken right now. So it isn't typically the small landlords that are seeing these massive increases. Some of them are, but usually it's large multinational corporations that own the lion's share of our housing stock right now in the province. And we need to make sure that we have some regulations. We shouldn't shy away from solutions that involve regulating profit margins and regulating things that are essential. Housing used to be considered a human right. Making larger profits, not exactly a human right, but we need to make sure that we create an environment where people can continue to be profitable, but we need to get the supply and demand back in stock, so back in balance. So this is why we need some of these NDP values around understanding the importance of strong social programs, and housing needs to be one of those key areas. So I'm not afraid to propose it and to work with them over the long term to make sure everyone can be successful. But people are losing their homes every day in this province, and that is not okay.
Yeah. You mentioned it before, climate change is a major platform for the Alberta NDP, but the carbon tax is highly unpopular in Alberta. So what do you see as an alternative approach to reduce carbon emissions?
Yeah, so I was part of the team that established the climate leadership plan originally, and I was convinced by all the economists in the room that that the consumer-based carbon tax would be effective. It hasn't been, and you're right, it is highly unpopular. And when I talk to Albertans, they want action on climate. So we need to stop fighting about which tool, and we need to get tools that they'll be supportive of and buy into. So I'm proposing that we move towards a cap and trade model, that we make sure that we are investing in helping the public reduce their emissions and their bills, as opposed to always giving that money to large industry. Industry absolutely has a role to play in reducing emissions, and they can pay for that. But if we want people to be able to reduce their emissions, we need to give them some money up front to be able to do things like energy efficiency improvements to their homes, putting on panels, buying electric vehicles, and setting up an e-charging network throughout the province to be able to reduce people's emissions. And the other thing we really need to get public investment in as well, that's part of my climate plan, is regional transit hubs. It's important for people who might need to go from Lethbridge to Calgary for an appointment to be able to do that. And while the Red Arrow and others may have filled some of that gap, if you live half an hour outside of Lethbridge, there isn't really an option for you to be able to get to a major appointment or those types of things. So we need to get back to having more regional transit initiatives. I know I grew up in a really small community in northern Alberta, Canuso. There's only 200 people who live there. And the Greyhound used to come through each and every day, and people would be on it regularly to go to their appointments or to go shopping or to be able to access the major centers. So it's important that we have a Crown corporation that helps deliver that regional transit, and that will also help reduce emissions over the long term too. So I'm excited for us to stop fighting about the federal consumer carbon tax, which certainly was broken when they exempted the East Coast home heating options, the fuels that are used there, and didn't exempt other parts of the country. The economists acknowledge that when you break a tool, it doesn't work, and that's why I'm proposing that we move towards a cap and trade model and see some real improvement on the quality of our air, the amount of emissions. And I know industry has found ways to pull carbon from the earth, and they can also pull it from the atmosphere. So I'm excited to work with them on driving more of that innovation, but I want the lion's share of the money we make to be focused on people reducing their emissions.
Well, it looks like we're about out of time here, unfortunately, because I had a few questions left for you there. But Sarah, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate having you on.
I'd love to chat again sometime, Jeanette. Sorry we didn't get to all your questions.
That's okay. Great to have you with us. Sarah Hoffman is one of 5 candidates running in the Alberta NDP leadership race. I'm Jeanette Roche. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks so much for watching.